All right. Identity and access management is the bridge that connects us with business. And today, we are here to present to you an architecture that will help you build securely, but most importantly, it will help you scale access management of your workload, in your workload on AWS for your workforce identities, which are your enterprise users. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Momita Saha. I am a Senior Security Partner Solutions Architect at AWS Global Strategic Initiatives. And today, I have with me Steve.
I lead product for our Identity Center product at AWS.
And Daniel.
Hello, Inforce. I'm Daniel Creed. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer, with Allegiant Travel Company. I've been doing InfoSec for 29 years, and I've been with Allegiant a little over a year and came there from Meta.
Thank you, Dan. And today we are here to present this architecture, and I'm very honored that in my 4 years of tenure with Amazon, I got the opportunity to work with Allegiant Airlines in supporting them building their identity infrastructure. And this is actually one of our favorite identity solutions. And today we are going to talk about the architecture and how it has helped Allegiant and the success story. Before we start, with a show of hands, we're curious to know, are you looking for a solution that will help you scale identity access management in a centralized infrastructure? Okay, I'm glad. And are you looking for a solution that will help you with least privilege access from day one in your infrastructure? And are we looking for a solution that will give us an efficient way to do identity so that we don't have to rely on the manual tasks and automate our infrastructure access? Well, I'm glad that we have the same questions, and then this is the session you want to be for the next 50 minutes. With that, the agenda for the day is, in this 300-level session, we will start with discussing role entitlements, the challenges of role entitlements, and how centralized managed infrastructure can help solve those challenges. Next, we will talk about IAM Identity Center, where you will do the centralization and how that solves the challenges. Next, we will show you how you can take it one step further with an automation built on top of Identity Center. And finally, we have the success story of Allegiant to know about their journey of consuming this automation and how it is helping them, if it is helping them, in the AWS environment. And wait for the end, because we have the code repository to share with you all, which you can take back and try the same automation in your infrastructure. With that, I would like to hand over to Steve. Over to you.
Great. Thanks, Momita.
Thank you.
And Dan, I hope this solution is helping you. Otherwise, this is going to have a surprise ending I wasn't expecting. But thanks, everybody. Looking forward to talking with you today a little bit about Identity Center, what it is, and some of its capabilities. I'm not going to go into the basics, though. We've done that previously, and there's some QR codes at the end to give you up to speed if you haven't explored Identity Center to date. But I want to take a simple view at first around accessing AWS today. And if we look at a simple perspective of a single account, you might federate into that account with your identity provider that you have in your enterprise. You might synchronize your users and groups as well, and then have a number of roles that allow you to access different resources within AWS today. So on a single account basis, it sounds really simple. So as an identity administrator, I can have those users and groups assigned to roles, access resources, job done. If you talk about it like that, it is simple. But as you start to look in the enterprise and you have multiple groups multiple teams within those groups, database admins that do different types of things, security admins that do different types of things. How do I manage that at scale? And again, if we think about the one account construct, I can set up a database admin role. And so now all my database admins have the ability to access that role and do database things. They can manage RDS, right? They can manage other databases within AWS, but that's all they can do. And so I can scope down their privileges, reduce their access to just the things they need to do their job. I can do the same thing with security admins as well, right? So they can look at logs, they can look at CloudWatch, they can look at events, they can use things like Firewall Manager, but I'm only going to allow them to use the services and tools they need to do their job. And so you can see how it starts to get a little complex. You have hundreds of users, thousands of users, potentially hundreds and thousands of groups, and how do you map those to different roles in AWS? You have to create those roles in each account. And so again, the one account construct, fairly straightforward, but it does start to get a little complex. But what we're seeing, obviously, is customers use more than one account. And that's where the challenge comes into play. And there's lots of reasons to use more than one account. An account is a good boundary container to reduce the blast radius. So if you have an application and maybe have a misconfiguration in that application, if it's in one account, it won't impact resources in another account. You might have a model where you have an application or an account per application, or you might even decompose that a little further and have a dev account, a test account, and a prod account for that single application. So you could have 3 accounts for an application times the number of applications. You can see how it quickly proliferates into 10, hundreds, even thousands of accounts in your organization. And so now going back to that model of I have to map my users to roles in a single account, that gets really complex, really tedious, and takes a lot of time to manage. And this is where Identity Center comes in to help make that a lot easier for you. And so Identity Center, some of the benefits there, it's one place for you to manage your identities across AWS. And so in the per account federation model, you have to set up account federation with your identity provider, like an Okta, Ping, and Azure AD, directly into each account. With Identity Center, you only have to do that once. You federate into Identity Center. You can synchronize your groups through SCIM, your users and groups through SCIM, and then have those users populated into Identity Center and available for use across all AWS applications and multiple accounts within your organization. You also have the ability to centrally manage that and look at, have one view across your organization to see who has access to what. And you can choose your identity source as well. So within Identity Center, you can have your own native directory in Identity Center and actually set up users in there and have them take advantage of the multi-account access or application access within Identity Center. Or again, you can federate with your identity provider that you have in your enterprise. But the real power here, and a lot of what we're going to talk about in the rest of the discussion today, is around multi-account permissions and the ability to take what we call a permission set. It's a template that has IAM policies in it, and you can attach roles to it. So if we go through our database admin example again, we have a database permission set, database admin permission set. We can assign our users and groups to accounts. We can assign that permission set and publish that permission set into all the individual accounts that we want those database admins to access. So we only have one place to manage that permission set. We can deploy it anywhere, and we have one place to centrally kind of get a view on it. So if we have changes, we don't have to change it in one place. We don't have to go into each account and manage the individual roles and update each role individually. We can manage that all through permission sets. And so I'm going to hand it back over to Mamita to talk us through the example in detail about how Identity Center can scale with multi-account permissions, and also talk about some of the interesting things they've done with Allegiant Airlines.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Steve. We have seen this, and we are talking about the challenges we have seen in managing the infrastructure with access in different accounts. Now, as Steve mentioned, with Identity Center, we have this layer in between. This is where you will directly go, or your identity administrators will directly go and manage all the permissions for all the different accounts. Here, this is a prototype with just 3 accounts, but imagine this as 300, 3,000, and even more. Here, when in your identity resource or external identity source, like Active Directory, Azure AD, PingFed, Okta, when you are creating your user groups, now Identity Center have a automatic synchronization, which they call as automatic provisioning through SCIM protocol. It's a cross-domain protocol that Identity Center leverage to bring all your user groups from your identity source inside the AWS environment. And this is done by Identity Center. So the moment we integrate Identity Center with our external identity source, this automatic provisioning will bring the user group into your environment. And now your identity administrator have to identify the right permission set which you will assign with the user group to get the right access in the account of your need. And this, in overall, is called as role entitlement. And as you can see, now that we are growing our number of user groups, and we have developers, now the developers will go into the developer administrator permission set and get the right access to the right accounts. With Identity Center, we are bringing in central location for management of all your user groups, central location for management of all your permission sets. You will have a consistent visibility of all your access throughout your organization from this one single place, which is set up in the management account, or you can delegate the administration of Identity Center in any of your chosen account in the organization. But imagine, still we have identity administrator doing the job of assigning the right permission set with the right user group to get the right access. In this world of innovation, and we want to make security more convenient for consumption. So here, if we can find a solution that can automate the work of an identity admin so that your workforce or your other application users or administrators don't have to wait for the identity admin to go into the account and do the permission set to account assignment. And this is where we have come up with a solution that can change or elevate the functionality of Identity Center by bringing in an automation to do this role entitlement at scale. The main resources of this automation involves a Lambda function and 3 event bridge rules. One rule which will alert us whenever a new user group is created inside your external identity source. The second event bridge rule will be triggered when you create a new permission set. And the third identity event bridge rule will be created when you have a new account. Now, why do we need 3 event bridge rules? Because we are trying to make a solution so that any of the 3 components involved in role entitlement, user group, permission set, and an account, whenever you are creating any of these 3 new resources, the automation should be triggered. Because that is when we need our identity administrator in the environment to do the role assignment. And this is where the Lambda is doing the automation, where it triggers and it validates that all the 3 components are present to do the automation. We'll start with the use case of a new user group. So you have a new user group in your environment, which is created in your external identity source. Identity Center will do the automatic provisioning through the SCIM protocol to bring that to AWS environment. And that creates a new SSO group in the environment. This will trigger an event bridge rule, which checks on an API call and that triggers the Lambda function. Now the Lambda function will look into the user group, and it will apply analytics to identify the name and also identify the right permission set and the right account to associate this user group with. So it will find the right permission set, attach it to the user group, and create a new role for you in the member account. The key to this automation is a naming convention. We need a standardization of naming convention in our environment where the automation asks for a keyword in your user group that represents or that identifies your permission set name, a keyword that uniquely identifies an account. We know there are character limits to all these resources, but just an example, a user group has a character limit of 1024 characters. And we have to make sure that the names have a little bit of functionality coming out of it. For an example, a user group whose name starts with, say, for a database account, I need a user group of database admin. You can structure it in a way so that the account name, the user group name, and the permission set name have an alignment. And that is where the Lambda will take those keywords and form the connection and do the role entitlement for us. The same happens when we have a new permission set. We are creating a new permission set, say, through CloudFormation template or through Terraform. That will again trigger a new event bridge rule with an API call. This in return triggers the Lambda function to do the right permission set attachment to the right user group, and you get a new role in your member account. Before moving on, with a show of hands, how many of us have experienced that we are creating a new account in our environment and we need roles immediately? Are we creating roles immediately whenever we are creating a new account? Okay. Are we creating roles to access the new account? Are we creating roles which are least privilege, or are we creating roles with administrator and read-only access? Right? We are mostly creating roles with administrator and read-only access when we are immediately spinning up a new account. And this is where our focus was to bring this solution at a place where we can create least privilege roles from day one, and we don't have to go back and change our roles and make it more least privilege in future. We want to do it right from the beginning. To do that, we have this solution where it will check. We are using Control Tower for creating new accounts. You can also do it outside Control Tower, but when you create a new account, that will also trigger an API call in your environment, and this will in return trigger the Lambda function. Now here comes one single step, a one-time activity by your identity admin, where they have to identify that whenever a new account is created, we need these 3 or 4 least privileged roles in the account, which can be your security administrator, network administrator, and some more depending on your company's policies and standards. When you have that ready for the very first time, you feed this to the Lambda function only once, and then going onwards, whenever you will create a new account, Lambda will read that input, that in the new account you need these 5 least privileged roles. It will immediately check for those permission sets and associate with the right SSO group to get you the roles in the new member account. To summarize this automation, the one thing the Lambda request is a standard naming convention. And now we have Allegiant. Daniel will explain to us how we have done it and what were the challenges we faced in doing this for Allegiant Airlines. Over to you, Dan.
Apologies, all my notes didn't get in here, so if you see me glancing down at my phone, I'm just checking my notes. So thank you, Momita. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate the time and taking the deeper dive in kind of the 50-100-foot level here. So I'm going to step it up a little bit. And, success is a moving target. It's more of a journey. Where we're successful today, tomorrow, there's room for improvement. So let me start off, as first like with any good journey, there's always an origin backstory. So who here knows what the origin story of IAC is? Like, let's even back that up even further. Who here, what does IAC stand for? Anyone? Wrong. What is the very first thing you do with any cloud provider when you want to spin up resources? You have to log in. How do you log in if you don't have an identity? The origin and true backstory of IAC should really be identity as code. And why does identity as code a good thing? Like, back in the day, you did everything through a GUI, and administering users at scale in a GUI is slow. It bottlenecks people. So through this automation, not only are we able to remove some of the pieces of the GUI and allow flexibility of, if it's 1 or 2 users, they can do a GUI, but we can also make it more self-service so that people can go in the code and have the approval process and modify, or attach to existing permission sets and roles and spin up users where we're no longer the bottleneck and it's running all through the automation of the code. So let's talk about scale. Scaling identity is hard. At Allegiant, service providers, contractors, staff change frequently. Our business model is built on being able to add and remove travel routes, new airport bases and locations quickly. So this involves a lot of frequent identity changes. Job codes quickly become inconsistent, which impedes consistency, and it's just another form of technical debt that you have to clean up later. So overly permissive user account, results in significant amount of breaches as well. In 2022, 60% of cloud breaches were due to misconfiguration. The bulk of those were IAM misconfigurations, S3 buckets with overly permissive EC2, critical infrastructure. So at Allegiant, we have 13,866 active users, as opposed to internal employees is around between 5,000 and 6,000. So that gives you a sense of how many contractors and service providers we have. We have 48 departments, 765 different job codes, and in total, 63,000, a little over total users, as we retain records of every individual service provider or employee who has worked with us since Allegiant since 2015. And the breakdown of that is actual internal employees, that's about 17,000 since the company was founded. So, where did we start? So, like many companies, our cloud journey started, let's go in, let's do it alone. We know what we're doing, we'll figure it out. That didn't work out so well, so we spun up a dedicated DevOps team. That DevOps team, built our DR, which was supposed to be the template for what is now, Cloud 2.0 Prod, which was a step further. And, the InfoSec team had very little IAC experience or knowledge. Most had never written code or even worked in Git. A year later now, the average person submitting 50 to 100 commits to our infrastructure as code base a month. We had very inconsistent engagement across the enterprise, which resulted in duplicate job codes, mismanaged permissions, lack of standards. So what do? You engage professional services. No professional services org and relationship is perfect, but Momita, Steve, like the whole team having direct access to, from the product owner to the professional services boots on the grounds who know it has been hugely instrumental and helpful in coming up with us to address this problem. So we engaged professional services over 18 months to help, in particular, make sure that our new cloud environment is well architected as well as upskill our team. So start before IAM Identity Center. So Allegiant was manually configuring role entitlement using a complex configuration file, as well as built from Excel spreadsheets, that would then be transferred into admins manually going into the GUI to configure our SSO within AD, within AWS individually, and within SailPoint for tie into our individual applications. We had duplicate policies with a lot of configuration errors. And one particular challenging thing is single group entitlement with multiple accounts. We're starting to sprawl out our account base. How do you have a developer with the amount of both persistent and impersistent teams that we have? Where do you have one generic developer group that gives them access to all the applications? Most companies are getting away from that to begin with, which ties back to the whole model of having multi-account strategy. So this automation as well allows us to break out where a person who's not on a persistent team but floats between teams to give them access in near real time to only the applications they need, as opposed to having a generic developer role. So, the bottom line with all the configuration drift, we implement identity individually in each account, 46 roles, 113 policies, with very different policy versions across 32 different accounts. And that's kind of where we started. So the challenges, business is demanding. It needs to be non-disruptive. Enterprise communication plan has to be put in place with a lot of effort to consolidate all these job codes. There's a lot of shadow IT that follows their own standards and spun up their own AWS infrastructure. So we have to coordinate these groups, get them together, and get them to agree, as Momita alluded to. Standards are essential and critical. It's what gives you consistency and powers the automation. And often that's the hardest part, is getting a unified group to agree on a set of standards. Other big thing would be needing to balance the need for access with these persistent teams and non-persistent teams while they work together, while maintaining the right balance between the principle of least privilege and speed of execution, which ties back to that. What do you do when you're in a crisis and you need access? Oh, just give them admin. So what are the benefits to Allegiant? We now have centralized federated access, which was a big goal for us. We've consolidated those 46 roles and 113 policies into 7 permission sets, which has enabled consistent per account access. It's automated role entitlement for the entire organization, where it largely went from a Jira ticket that typically took 2 days to near instantaneously. I can't stress enough that consistency equals good security in many ways, because just like with science, the experiment's got to be repeatable, and there's only so much room for creativity within a framework of standards. So where are we today? Today, security infrastructure tooling and IAM are done as infrastructure as code. SCIM gives us the ability to still allow some usage through AD groups and to tie them in, but because of SCIM as well and the automation, it's all automated and tied where, Windows-heavy applications will get the AD groups that they need, which will tie back to our pipeline and distribute out the AWS permissions in a least privilege model as well, which is what we need. As I mentioned, the team commits to the repo every month, and we have a well-architected AWS environment that is largely built upon infrastructure as code automation. It's built upon least privilege, and where account provisioning, automation, permission set automation, all deliver a consistent, standardized way to build and manage our expanding AWS infrastructure. Our account and number of accounts are only going up. So where do we go tomorrow? Like I said, success is a moving target. And Steve, it's great to have you here to get the feedback on, new feature requests that we need. We want integration with our privileged access management system. We want to take this a step further and tie in just-in-time and breaking glass break glass provisioning. We want to do session recording for all elevated privilege access accounts. And as well, we want to take passwords and secrets and automatically rotate our service account passwords and integrate that into our secrets management. Once we're done with that, the goal will be to get attestation and audit artifacts created, stored, and approved right in the repo. In general, this should give our users a very, not no code, but low code entry point because of the standardization, where somebody can quickly go into the repo, the approval chain is there, creates the attestation and audit artifact for it, and creates a complete life cycle from a security perspective of least privilege. Then when we're done with that, we want to as well move into firewall rules as code. Maybe a little bit crazy, but if you drive it by business logic and do accepted risk principles, perhaps we can open it up where our developer can commit a code change and actually test out one of their public-facing apps in a just-in-time, time-boxed rule set, all automated again, where security is no longer the bottleneck, but the enabler. So with that, we have some key takeaways. The first of which, IAM is most certainly a critical pillar of information security.
The second one is utilizing IAM Identity Center will allow us to centralize the entire infrastructure access management.
Automation allows role provisioning at scale. Again, I can't stress enough, being able to do it with a relatively low code footprint that they can go in, and the approval and the automation and all that is right there most definitely allows you to do it at scale and quickly.
And least privilege being the central core of access management. With automation, we are trying to strive for least privilege across the board from day one.
And lastly, automation and automating role entitlement requires a naming standard and standards. Now, some would argue that it takes away from creativity, but it gives you a footprint with which to work off of, as well as descriptive categorization, making it easier for your end users to have that low code entry of just following a standard.
And it gives you a collateral benefit of following standardization across the board, which you can leverage in future with tags and attribute-based access control. And with that, we have the resources. Here is the QR code for the code repository, which you can try in your own infrastructure and share your feedback through the GitHub repository. Hope that link works. Great. And as Steve was mentioning about the IAM Identity Center previous sessions that we had at last Reinforce or reInvent with the details of, if you want to know more how Identity Center is doing the work in the back end, the automatic provisioning, these are the sessions you may like to go and check out. And with that, it's a wrap from us. Hope you liked it. Hope this code repository, hope the automation we have tried to share helps you build a more secure infrastructure. And your surveys are very important for us to bring new and custom solutions that can help all of us build a secured future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.